My name is Dana Pruitt. I am 31 years old. 2 years after I lost my mother's ring, during the hardest stretch of my life, I watched another woman wear it down the aisle at my brother-in-law's wedding, and I was sitting close enough to recognize the engraving before anyone said a word. Welcome back to my channel, where everyday people face impossible moments and find the strength to stand their ground. That is my story. One ring, one engraving, and a truth that finally caught up to a lie at exactly the right moment. If this reminded you of something taken from you and explained away as a misunderstanding, drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. The ring sits on my hand now. I look at the engraving, sometimes the initials and the year, and I think about my mother telling me I'd know what to do with it when I was ready. I don't think she meant a quiet confrontation at someone else's wedding reception, but I think she would have understood why it happened exactly the way it did. I don't know what the next few years will look like with Denise. Family relationships rarely resolve as cleanly as we'd like. What I do know is that I finally understand something I didn't fully grasp during the year I was too exhausted to fight for what mattered. Grief makes people vulnerable in ways that others can take advantage of, sometimes without ever fully admitting to themselves that's what they're doing. She hasn't pushed back on that, which surprised both of us. His father, who stayed mostly quiet during that kitchen table conversation, told Marcus privately afterward that he'd had his own doubts about some of Denise's decisions over the years, but never felt it was his place to interfere. That admission didn't undo anything, but it told me I wasn't the only one who had noticed her pattern of overstepping long before any of this happened. We agreed that going forward, if either of us noticed the other letting something go out of exhaustion rather than genuine acceptance, we'd say so directly, instead of assuming time would sort it out on its own. Marcus and his mother have spoken only a handful of times since that conversation at the kitchen table, mostly brief and logistical. He's told her clearly that rebuilding trust will take longer than an apology, and that he needs consistent honesty from her before things return to how they were. In the weeks after the wedding, Marcus and I talked more honestly about that first year after the miscarriage than we had in a long time. He admitted he'd noticed me pulling back from things during that period and hadn't pushed me to fight for what mattered because he didn't want to add pressure on top of grief. I told him I understood that instinct, even if it had let something slip through that shouldn't have. Brooke returned the ring to me the following week, in person with another apology she didn't need to give, since none of this had been her doing. She told me she'd spoken to Aaron about it too, and that he was upset with his mother in a way Brooke hadn't seen from him before. I had the ring cleaned and resized back down, and I wear it on my right hand most days now, where I can see it. Denise cried, said she was sorry, said she hadn't thought about it the way we were describing it. I believe in her own mind she'd built a story where this was generous and family-minded rather than what it actually was. Marcus told his mother, in a tone I'd never heard him use with her, that this wasn't a misunderstanding to smooth over with an apology and a returned ring, that what she'd done was take something that wasn't hers and lie about why she was keeping it. He told her there would be consequences for trust between them going forward, no matter how this immediate situation got resolved. I didn't raise my voice. I told her the ring was the last physical object I had that touched my mother's hand every day for over 30 years, that I'd worn it on a chain through the hardest year of my life, and that taking it from my dresser under a false pretense was never a decision that belonged to her, regardless of her intentions. I asked her directly why she'd told me nearly 2 years before that she was keeping it safe for me if her actual plan had been to give it to someone else. She didn't have a clean answer. She said something about not wanting to upset me further during a hard time, about thinking I'd eventually understand that keeping family items in circulation was healthier than letting them sit untouched. Her first instinct was to minimize it. She said it had been just sitting in a box for years, that she'd always intended to give it back eventually, that she thought of it as something that could be shared within the family. She said Brooke had admired it once at a dinner months earlier, and she'd decided in the moment it would be a meaningful welcome gift. 3 days later, we went to his parents' house. Denise was in the kitchen. Marcus asked her to sit down and told her, calmly, that we knew about the ring, that Brooke had explained how she came to have it, and that we needed her to explain her side. We didn't confront Denise that night, at her younger son's wedding, in front of 200 guests. We agreed, standing near that dance floor, that this deserved privacy, not a scene that would become the story everyone remembered about Aaron and Brooke's wedding. I found Marcus near the edge of the dance floor and told him quietly what had happened. I watched his expression move from confusion to disbelief to a controlled anger I'd rarely seen from him. He asked if I was certain. I told him about the engraving, the initials, the year, the conversation with Brooke. He didn't ask again. Brooke's face moved through confusion, then something closer to horror as she put the pieces together. She apologized immediately, clearly mortified, said she had no idea that Denise had presented it as a gift that was hers to give. I told her I believed her completely and I meant it. I asked her to hold on to it for the rest of the night so we wouldn't disrupt the reception, and told her I'd handle the rest directly with Denise. I didn't make a scene. None of this was Brooke's fault, and she deserved to enjoy her own night. I explained calmly and briefly that the ring had belonged to my late mother, that I had engraved it myself after my wedding, and that Denise had taken it from my dresser nearly 2 years earlier under the pretense of keeping it safe during a hard time. I asked if I could see it. Brooke slipped it off and handed it over without hesitation. I turned it and found the engraving on the inside of the band. My parents' initials. The year 9. I stood there in the middle of my brother-in-law's wedding reception. String lights overhead, a band playing somewhere behind me, holding my mother's ring, and something that had been unsettled for nearly 2 years finally clicked into place. At the reception, I found a moment to approach Brooke directly and asked, as casually as I could manage, about the ring on her right hand. She smiled and said Denise had given it to her about 6 months earlier, calling it a family heirloom she wanted Brooke to have as a welcome into the family, something old to wear alongside something new. Denise had told her it had been sitting in a box for years with no one to wear it. I sat through the rest of the ceremony with my heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the happy occasion around me. I didn't stand up. I told myself there was a real chance I was wrong, that grief plays tricks on a person's perception. During the signing of the marriage certificate, Brooke held her hand against the paper to steady it from the wind, and the light caught the ring at an angle that let me see a thin engraving on the inside of the band. I couldn't read it from where I sat, but I knew the position of an engraving when I saw one, and I knew exactly what was etched into the inside of my mother's ring, because I'd stood next to the jeweler when he did it. Something tightened in my chest before I'd even consciously registered why. The shape of the band, the faded gold tone, the size of the stone, all of it pulled at a memory I hadn't let myself touch in a while. I told myself there are plenty of simple gold bands with small sapphires in the world. I tried to focus on the ceremony instead.
I sat in the second row on the groom's side, close enough to see everything clearly. When Brooke appeared at the end of the aisle, the crowd did the soft collective intake of breath that happens at weddings. She wore a fitted lace dress, hair pulled back, hands clasped around a small bouquet. On her right hand, the traditional something old, sat a thin gold band with a small blue stone.
I told Marcus that night. He spoke to her and got a similarly vague answer. We let it go again, which I regret, though I understand now how exhaustion and conflict avoidance kept winning during that period of our lives. The wedding took place this past spring at an outdoor venue 40 minutes from our house, 200 guests, a live band, a wooden arch covered in white flowers.
About a year and a half after the miscarriage, Marcus's younger brother, Aaron, got engaged to a woman named Brooke. I liked her well enough from the handful of times we'd met, warm in a slightly performative way, clearly eager to be embraced by this loud, close family. Sometime during the 10 months of wedding planning, I asked Denise about the ring again. She said she'd misplaced it during a recent garage cleanout, but was almost certain it was in one of the storage totes, and would find it soon.
I should say plainly that after the miscarriage, I went through nearly a year where I struggled to care about things that should have mattered more. Therapy helped enormously, but during that stretch, a missing ring felt like one more thing I didn't have energy to fight for. I told myself it would turn up. Months passed. I asked twice more over that first year, and both times she gave a version of the same answer. It's somewhere safe, I'll get it to you soon. I believed her, partly because grief had made me passive about things I'd normally have pursued harder. I was too tired and too sad to argue the way I might have on a normal day. I said, okay, she was my mother-in-law, she'd been kind to me in 100 other ways, and it didn't occur to me that she might be dishonest about something that mattered this much. About a week into her stay, I noticed the wooden box on my dresser, where I always kept the ring when I wasn't wearing it, was empty. I asked Marcus first, then Denise, more out of process than real suspicion. She said she'd taken it. She said she'd noticed it sitting out while cleaning and worried I might lose it or damage it, given how distracted I was during that time. She said she'd put it somewhere safe and would return it once I was more myself. The physical recovery took weeks. The rest took much longer. Denise came to stay for what she called a few days to help, which stretched into nearly 3 weeks. She cooked, cleaned, ran errands, some of it genuinely useful, while I was barely getting out of bed. She also had a way of taking over that I was too exhausted to push back on, even when her involvement ran a little deeper than I would have chosen. About a year into our marriage, I got pregnant. We were happy, the kind of happy that makes you start imagining a future before you've told anyone. I was almost 14 weeks along when I miscarried. It happened at home on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus came home within 20 minutes of my call, and everything after that blurred into hospital lighting and quiet conversations, and a grief I hadn't expected to feel that deeply. Then finally had it sized properly afterward and asked a jeweler to engrave my parents' initials and the year 1986 on the inside of the band, something I'd wanted to do for a while. Marcus's mother, Denise, ran the family the way some women run small operations. She organized every holiday, tracked 2 generations of birthdays, and had opinions about decisions that weren't always hers to weigh in on. I liked her well enough in those early years. I wore it on a chain around my neck for almost a year after she passed because my own fingers felt wrong wearing it, like I hadn't earned the right yet. I met Marcus about 8 months later. He was steady in a quiet way and never rushed me through grief he didn't fully understand. We married 2 years after that. I wore the ring on a thin chain under my dress during the ceremony. My mother died when I was 24, 2 years before I met my husband, Marcus. Near the end of her illness, she took her wedding ring off her finger and put it in my hand. A simple gold band with a small sapphire. A gift from my father back in 19... She told me it was the one thing she wanted me to have that wasn't about money. When you're ready, you'll know what to do with it, she said.